Hello? Can you hear us?
That's not playing.
Live. Hello? Can you hear us? Hello? Can you hear us? Good. Hi, everybody. This is Purple Trader 3169. This is Dan Pinkston back for more.
Making a triumphant return.
This is my sister, Melissa Hernandez. And today, we're talking about the perception of time. She looks really thrilled to be here. This is her first stream. His second stream.
Yeah.
So.
I'm a media savvy veteran at this point.
We are doing this episode for New Year's, the perception of time. So, get ready, and this hour will fly by.
Thrills, chills.
Do you guys know anything about the perception of time?
Well, only
Do you
from
live
my
it?
Yeah, that's right. Only from my perspective as being a slightly older person. You know, your perception does change somewhat. Days seem to go faster.
That's true.
All time seems to go faster the older you get. So that's
true.
Seems kind of unfair when you think about it. It should go the opposite. Life should be better as you get older instead of worse.
Yeah, the
And
older
you go
you get,
faster. Yeah, it's like
the wiser you get. You should be
right.
being able to cherish
Well,
those.
once you're on the long glide path to the grave, things start kind of moving faster. It's like you're going downhill on an out-of-control sled. And down at the bottom, there's a set of railroad tailings or whatever they are, you know, you're going to run into. But on that cheery thought, let's move forward.
Or a 6 foot.
Yeah, they do
drop.
a 6 foot hole.
Anything you'd like to add about the perception of time?
Just, when I'm bored, time goes by real slow.
I don't know if she's trying to insinuate anything, but...
I am not insinuating.
Saying it flat out.
I also wanted to mention that for Christmas, I got a handy-dandy tablet for said podcasts. So here we go. We'll see how this works out.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll start out with the perception of time is the study or chronoception. It's a field within psychology, cognitive linguistics, and neuroscience that refers to the subjective experience or sense of time, which is measured by someone's own perception of the duration of the infinite and unfolding events.
All right, well, we're done here.
Yeah.
We've summed it all up.
That went fast. So there's a couple of terms that we need to know here. There's a time interval, which is the time, which is between two events, and the time duration, which is the perceived time
The event starts and ends.
Right. So there are certain things that can change those perceptions. Both, age, there's, if you're doing a lot of things like during the duration or in between, in the intervals, things like that can affect the perception of time. But we'll go through each of these things. When it's kind of weird when you're looking. I thought when you're gonna research it, it was gonna be like really in plain terms, and it wasn't. It was kind of like all scientific jargon. Like it was all very mostly just studied, very scientifically, and it was. I mean, nothing was put in plain terms. So I'm gonna try and do this as easily as possible.
Okay.
First thing.
Dumb it down for us.
I'm gonna have to for you guys. So.
Where's the snare drum?
So there's also retrospective, which is retrospective time estimation.
Mm-hmm.
So like when you're looking back and how long it takes looking back, and prospective time estimation.
Which is what?
When you're in the moment, how long it takes.
Okay.
So you're sitting here thinking this is taking forever because you're in the moment and you're not enjoying it, right? But when you look back on it, you're like, oh my god, that was so much fun.
Okay.
Actually, one of the things though that made, like, the biggest thing is if you're told that you're going to be timing it in your head. So like if I say, before you do this, I want you to estimate how much time this takes. That's one of the things the biggest thing that affects your time perception. So if you knew about it beforehand, you're going to be more accurate, obviously, because you're paying attention to it more. So, yeah.
Okay.
Any comments on that?
Well, as William J. Friedman once said.
I also want to comment that when I started doing these podcasts, my dad was like, do you just get all this stuff off of Wikipedia? And I was like...
The answer was yes.
No, I get a lot of it off of Wikipedia. But I also get a lot of these... I actually go onto scientific, like, websites and, like...
Like TikTok?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I actually go and read scientific articles.
You actually have a lot of notes there.
Yeah. So, this is like real stuff. Just so you know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway. There are 3 categories.
Okay.
So, sub-seconds, interval timing, and circadian timing. Sub-second is like, you're thinking about it in actual time.
Mm-hmm.
Interval timing, second to minute, and circadian timing is like roundabout, like when this happened in relation to something else. Like, this happened before 9/11, or this happened after 9/11.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I can see the issue here with this tablet is I'm having to... So, right. Anyway. Animals. That was one of the things I really wanted to look into, is how flies, like how smaller animals perceive time, and how they say that, like, a fly, they perceive time slower, like,
because
they have a shorter lifespan.
Yeah. It says animals of smaller size have a metabolic rate, so they experience time more slowly than larger animals.
Is that why they can react so quickly to things?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can hardly ever swat a fly because
They see your hand
looking
going
at-
like this.
Yeah.
I just killed 10 seconds. Of
Yeah,
this
that's
episode. Goldfish, they can perceive time. It's kind of, this is why.
Yeah, I was just going to say the exact same thing. Like,
How do you know?
So they did a couple of studies. One of the studies was, and this is all kind of,
They asked goldfish.
yeah.
What time is it?
But they went off on a greatly divergent path, and many of the results were not good because they were actually analyzing goldfish crackers. So it kind of skewed the results because they did not have much of a perception of time.
Yeah. Well, I this whole thing is like with animals is kind of, how are you gonna, even if you do all these tests, how is it, even if it relates to humans, how do you know that translates to animals, right? And even if it's a subconscious thing, does that even, I mean, time to me seems like it would be a conscious thing, not like a subconscious thing. You know? So like one of the tests that they did was they did a light stimulus, right? Like flashing lights. And then after like 10 seconds, they shocked them. And then they noticed, like, after a while of doing this, they saw the fish, you know, after however many seconds, like 8 seconds, they started swimming around, really, you know, agitated.
Okay.
Like, how is that not just conditioning a fish to not want to get shocked?
I don't know, I say it makes me think that, like, time is only really exists based on one's subjective memory.
Yeah.
And if a thing doesn't have a memory, then there of something repeating, then there is no time.
Right.
It's just based on memory.
Mm-hmm.
If my cat Oreo responds to her name, it's because she remembered it. How long ago? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so you would think that because that entity has a memory, which you can tell has a memory, then there must be some sort of concept of time.
I don't
Well,
know.
Like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, if you're not, like, this is why this is like cognitive neuroscience.
Right.
Like, how much cognitive capability does an animal have?
Right.
Probably not very much. So it makes me wonder if animals really do have any, whether it even be subconscious concept of time.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Well, some animals have a concept of future in some sense. Like, for example, a squirrel storing up acorns for the future.
Yeah.
I mean, but that may just not be a matter of thought. It may just be a matter of chemicals in their brain.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Instinct.
humans are probably the only kind of biological entity that has a sense of the life being and time being finite.
Right.
And anticipation, whereas animals really don't. I don't think. I mean, they can sense when something will happen. I mean, that something will happen in the future. Like they know at around 5 o'clock. They don't know what 5 o'clock is, but they know it's time that they will be fed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they act in a way that shows that they are anticipating a future event. What they're not anticipating is probably the end of life.
I was just going to
Except
say
when
that.
they get to the
Right.
very end, and they say that, like dogs, when they know they're about to die, they will creep away and hide, and they won't eat, and they'll, won't interact. So there's something there, but not like, we're thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years in advance that something's going to happen.
Right.
Whereas they're it's much more a sensory kind of experience for them.
Well, and I didn't. This is all theory. I didn't read any about this, but like preparing not just for the next season, but preparing for what if something doesn't happen. Like like the migration patterns. Like what if they don't have that water? What if they don't have those? They don't have any sense of preparation. You know what I'm saying there? Like they don't have any. So even if they foresee, in the future, like okay, in a year I'm gonna have to go, or in 6 months I'm gonna have to walk this again. I'm gonna have to migrate again. They're not changing their pattern based on 6 months previous. They're not changing their pattern now based on their experience. You get what I'm trying to say?
Well, I mean, some of these things, they, come out of a biological urge, but they are, a basic urge to go where it's warmer and follow migration routes. But they're probably, how they actually do these things is informed by immediate cues that we don't even see. Like,
Right.
Some birds, they migrate based on, the magnetic poles.
Right.
They figure that, because of something in their body. Well, the poles are shifting, so maybe 100 years from now they'll be, migrating in a different pattern.
Right.
But they're perceiving things that we don't really perceive, but it's not necessarily conscious thought. It's something that affects their biological urge.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, obviously I have no idea, but
Yeah.
that animals probably, for the most part, function based off of innate impulse. Sort of like, I have two thought patterns. One is, I guess what we would call subconscious, right? I'm hungry, I eat.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, I'm sitting here pondering, when I'm going to die.
Right.
Or how much time I have left.
Right.
And maybe animals really survive on the former.
Right.
And are not, like Dad was saying, this is just part of the functioning of the physiology of the animal.
Well, one of the interesting things is, they did another study. I'm not sure what golden shiners are. I don't know if I think they're fish.
Fish.
And dwarf inangas. So that whole thing with like food, it's called time place learning. So basically conditioning. You show them a light, or you show them a light, and then 10 seconds later you give them food. They can learn that. They can learn that time place learning, but they can't learn it on predation risk. So like they can't learn that if it's they weren't able to learn it based on whether a predator is there or not. They can learn it based on food, but they can't learn it based on whether a predator was there. So like they can't avoid somewhere based on whether, a shark was there. Which I think is kind of strange. Like, is food more, I guess food would be more important than,
Well, I think, of course they do act in some ways, and maybe it's innate about, where predators would be. They avoid, like a squirrel will hide.
Yeah.
Because there might be a predator. They have patterns of behavior that relate to avoiding being eaten. But maybe that's not a conscious thing, that's just built into their
But it's
genetic
saying
program.
that they don't learn that. I'm thinking it depends on what kind of animal it is. If it's a herd animal, like fish, how they go in schools, I don't know. That's just. But, anyway. However, here's something to keep in mind, Dad.
Okay.
Dogs are able to perceive durations of minutes up to several hours, no matter what the owner does. So,
I don't quite get that. What does that mean?
so if you abandon your dog for days at a time.
They'll know that it's days instead of minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they get all skinny because they don't have any food, and so eventually they die. So, yeah. I see
So
your
they
point.
know if you're abandoning
Right,
them to
yeah.
let your, have your
No,
daughter
well,
let them out.
Well, and dogs, you see this online all the time. Somebody's dog is lost for 3 years, and the dog will recognize the owner.
Yeah.
And, so that there's some kind of memory there.
Yeah.
Like, what about that saying then, like, I don't know if it's dogs or cats, but, like, when you leave your pet and they don't think you're ever going to be coming back.
Yeah.
They don't know that yesterday you came back at around this time.
Yeah.
Right.
They just think you're never coming back.
Yeah.
Well, you wonder how much of it is some, quote, emotional response, and how much is an animal's constant preoccupation with having food.
Surviving,
all they can think of, that is basically a dog or cat's life, is when and how will I get food? And so, they associate the owner with giving them food. Now, whether or not, I don't think dogs have human emotions, at least not as complex as humans have. So it's like people who say, oh, the dog bit me and now he's licking me because he's so sorry. Dogs aren't sorry.
Maybe because you had some blood on your
that's
hand.
right, exactly. So,
It tastes like chicken wing.
well, one thing that is interesting, I think, is that every human being has thoughts about time.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, I would think, have contemplated all these things that happened to you. Like in my case, it happened to me 50 years ago. I can remember with complete clarity. Things
So
that
you
happened
think-
last week, I may not remember what I did on such and such a day. And that some things that, it's like they said, the difference between your experience of time, if you're doing something pleasurable, versus, how would a minute feel of something pleasurable, having a good conversation or whatever, or a good meal, versus a minute with your hand on a hot stove. Your experience of that time is very different depending on your external circumstances.
Well, and we're gonna get into this a little bit later, but it's when you're younger, you're always having new experiences.
That's a good point.
But you're trying to remember what you're thinking what you did last Sunday, right?
Yeah.
But what you did last Sunday is the same thing you did every Sunday for the past 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's hard to remember if you did that on Sunday or if you did it on Saturday or what order you did it on, or but the other thing is, even if that may have been the first time you did it that you remembered it.
Well,
Or-
a simple example of that is when you're driving somewhere and you've never been there before, and it seems to take you a lot longer to get to the place where you turn around. When you come back, it seems to go a lot faster.
Right.
Because you're aware already. You don't have that novelty factor
Right.
that you might have otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you're just doing something repetitive,
Yeah.
that with no new stimulus, then you're gonna have a different perception than like the first time you learned it or encountered it.
Yeah. That is called. Hold on, I'll find it. It has a certain name. Something blindness.
Okay.
We'll find it when we get there.
Yeah, put this in the notes at the end of the presentation in the comment section.
Yeah. But
what?
moving on.
Okay.
People tend to recall events as occurring further back in time than they did, and recent events occurring further back in time than they did, and distant events occurring more recently than they did.
Oh, okay. So, in other words, something that happened to me when I was 20 that I vividly remember
Feels like it happened.
feels like it was
yesterday.
just, as they always say, it seems like it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
Versus something that happened when I was 40 seems like years, as it was, years and years and years ago.
Or like, hey, we did this, podcast. When was it? Was it 2 months ago? Was it a year ago? Was it, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, you can look it up, obviously, but,
Mm-hmm. Well, like another thing, when you study history, it seems like a year is a really long time. Many things happen in that year. Say the year 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened, and America got into the war, and the World War II was going on, and many, many things happened. And it seems like a much longer period of time than a year seems to us. Like, this is the last day of 2023, and it just flew by.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Well, like for me, I mean, in the context of like my addiction in recovery, though, there's like an experiential memory of living a life of like drinking every day and what that felt like. And today I think that was a long time ago. I don't really remember the actual feeling of being drunk. All I remember is I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's been a long time since I've had a drink. And then I'm like, wait a second. It's only been since August.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's not a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At all. It's the same thing with this dreary job I have. I'm like, I could swear to you, I've been toiling at an auto parts store for, the past decade, and it's only been, I have worked there less than 60 days.
Yeah. Is that right? Okay.
But, I mean, so it is, I think probably also that for me at least, if you're experiencing something negative, that the time is going by slower, as opposed to experiencing something positive.
Yeah.
Well, and if it's something that is along the lines of what you're saying, if it's something that is creating anxiety and worry and dread, then the time seems to go very slowly.
Yeah.
And whereas if it's something pleasurable, then like, I'm sad that movie is over. It seemed like it was such a good movie that it seemed like it was only a half hour long. Whereas you see something that's really boring,
Yeah.
it can seem like it was a day. It was days long, even though the objective time was the same.
Yeah. So, there are a few things here. Vjord's law. Shorter intervals tend to be overestimated, while longer intervals tend to be underestimated. So, like you're saying, a year, shorter interval tends to be overestimated. That seemed like a long time.
Okay.
While longer intervals tend to be underestimated. It felt like, the past 30 years flew by. Seemed like 1990 was like yesterday. But that's because we're old. You're older.
This is really insightful, isn't it? You're old. You're old. You're not as old.
Time intervals associated with more changes may be perceived as longer. So if you have more changes within that time interval, so 1941, there were so many changes within that time.
Right.
perceived as longer than intervals with fewer changes. So 2023, not much happened, but 2019, COVID,
Yeah.
you know, it seemed like
2020.
2020.
And with, my personal situation, I've been to a 30-day rehab stint 7 times in 2 years.
Mm.
That certainly feels like longer than 2 years. That I've been in and out of a rehab
Yeah,
for longer than 2 years.
yeah.
In fact, it hasn't even been 2 years.
Well, and
Wow, it does seem.
It was a year and a half that I was going in and out of rehab.
Yeah,
and it's such an intense experience for you that stretches out. For me, of course, all that had, is intense in many ways, but I didn't experience what you're experiencing,
Right.
so it seems like not as long, when you were starting to do that,
Yeah.
that treatment and, recovery. So, one thing everybody thinks about one way or another, anybody who's, any conscious being or human, you think about time a lot. How much you worry about most people are probably mentally calculating how much time you think you have left. I mean, especially when you get to a certain point where you're telling yourself, based on average lifespan, I'm halfway through, or I'm more than halfway through. So for me, based on average lifespan, I'm probably, 80 or 85% through, which is kind of a, it's a weird thought, but if you think about it all the time, if you're obsessed with it, then you ruin what time you have left. But, so people think about that. They think about, am I wasting time? Time is going by. No matter what you do, time goes on.
right.
The sun's going to come up every morning. And so you are conscious of whether you're doing things to make the most of the time you have. Most people are thinking about that one way or another. And sometimes people are able to modify their behavior and to do something that they perceive as more valuable with their time, and most of us don't. Most of us know what we should be doing or what we could be doing, but don't.
Right.
There's this old saying, this guy said, I looked at the birds and wondered, why they stay here and don't go somewhere else. And then I thought the same thing about myself. It's just part of being a human being. And so we're all thinking about time in some way or another. In our society, things are regulated by fairly precise time intervals. I have to be to work at 9 a.m., no matter what. I have to, even if there's something else I'd rather be doing. I have 1 hour for lunch. I have this much time to drive from here to there. Whereas in other societies where time is still important, but it's not chopped up the way we chop it up. Because that tends to make you go from short term to short term without thinking in the more longer term repercussions of how you're spending your time. So for us, everything's broken down into weeks, right? And so every Friday, at least for me, I think, oh God, another week went by, and it was so fast.
Yeah.
But that's partly a function of how old I am. So like Emily, my granddaughter, who's 9, she's probably thinking a week seems like forever.
Yeah.
And so that's just part of being conscious of how long life is. And how, I don't know if this is true, but it's a cliche that you tend to think of time as what proportion is it of your life that you have lived.
Right.
A week for me, or a month for me is, well, I've lived nearly 70 years, so that's 840 months, something like that. So for me, a month is 1/840th of my life. For Emily, who's lived, or Joe, who's 6 or 5, and so he has lived 60 months. Every month is 1/60th of his life.
Yeah.
And you can't count the time when you were a baby before you were, conscious of things. And so that's one of the reasons time seems to go faster the older you get. And
Yeah.
but that's just part of being a thinking person. I mean, we're not completely logical, obviously. We're probably 20% logical and 80% emotional when you think about it.
Right.
There's also the concept of, like, time. It's like a leading edge of time is going by. I mean, every moment is the newest moment. And now what I just said is in the past. The only thing that is present is this, not even millisecond. It's, it's everything else is past. Even the 20 minutes we've been sitting here, or however long it's been. And thinking about that the future, even though we think about it all the time, has not yet occurred. And it's these kinds of things that people sit around and think about, and probably most people are thinking more or less the same things, at least in the same society. It might be, like I was saying, how our time is chopped up so much. Like, think about what it's like for an Aborigine.
Yeah.
In Australia, whose time is based on, the seasons.
Well, what's kind of, weird too is, like, ever since the dawn of time, people have been trying to quantify it and, explain it, and, even like Stonehenge with the, like,
Solar calendar built
yeah,
into
and the Aztec calendar, and always trying to figure out with the moon cycles and things like that. They've always been trying to figure out how to quantify it in some way and explain it in some way. So it's always been kind of ingrained in our consciousness, I guess.
Well, that's true. I mean, there are certain things that lend themselves to regular periods of time, like the lunar calendar, 28 days. The winter solstice, and the spring, or the summer solstice, the longest day and the shortest day, and then those days where the night and the day are the same. And how they didn't have, they were very observant, because they had to be more observant than we are. I mean, you had to be observant about when do we have to go plant. When are the animals likely to be more active or not as active, and where should we move to find the most food. We're kind of divorced from that stuff in some sense, but
yeah, but
that is true.
We shifted our focus. I mean, once we got we got clocks, sundials, clocks, we just shifted our focus onto, we have to be at work at 9 o'clock. We have to,
Well, once you have an organized society that is not based on everybody doing their own thing, where people have to interact, you have to have time when someone will be there to organize what you're doing. Like this watch I'm wearing right now, this is an atomic watch. So this is down to the tens of thousands of seconds accuracy. I mean, more than that, even more accurate than that. So, we've developed this way of measuring time that, people didn't have before. And maybe that's better or not, I don't know, but.
Well, the only reason that we ended up with, the system that we have now, with, exact measurements and time zones and things like that is because of the railroad system and people interacting. It really isn't that old. It's like only 150 years old or something like that.
Well, I mean, that's part of our modern. That's one of the reasons we have time zones.
Yeah.
And people had to be exact about railroad timetables and so on. But even, like 400 years ago, people had to know when church started.
Yeah.
Or, of course, they weren't wearing watches then at that time. I mean, clocks were really invented about, 400 years ago, maybe 400 years ago. 400 years, 500 maybe. But anyway, the point being, not 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So, because people didn't really need it as much, but you still needed some way of figuring out, like in medieval times, they would, ring the bells every certain number of times during the day when people could kind of synchronize their activities for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas a person who's just out in the wilderness by themselves, you don't need to. I mean, you need to know some basic stuff. How long is the sun going to be up? And that sort of thing. When are the animals going to be active to go hunt them?
Well, and your biologically, your body wakes up based on the sun. You get the
Your circadian rhythm.
yeah.
But one interesting thing about that is that I've read and I've experienced this, that the actual human circadian rhythm is like 25 hours, not 24 hours like it is on the clock. And so one time when I was in law school, and I was basically studying around the clock for finals, my first set of finals. And I found that my time frame over like the course of 10 days would go like an hour later each day. So I might study till midnight one day, and then I'd find that I'd be staying up until 1 o'clock the next day, until 2 o'clock in the morning the next day, and so on, until basically the whole time was shifted so that I was working all night and sleeping during the day. It's just, you would think it'd be simply based on what times the sunrise and set, but that changes day to day.
Yeah.
So and there's not necessarily an innate 24-hour period. There's just like kind of a length of light period, because that's when people could do things.
Right.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah, get on your. You now have your your passcode memorized from watching you do it.
It's 132.
Hey, would you?
If anybody finds her tablet, the number is not 132.
5.
Would you? So that was, that was basically it.
What?
Things last longer when you have more stimuli, during the duration.
Mm-hmm.
They seem longer away when you have more things in between. That's basically what's going on there. So the other thing is the stopped clock illusion.
What's that?
So when you're looking at a clock, when you first get a task, and then you look at the clock, it seems like the second hand is going slower when you first look at it than it actually is. And that's like, it's called, or something that is like a repetitive thing, like a drum beating or something like that. It seems like it's going slower than it actually is.
Oh, okay.
Because anything in the first part of your task and the last part of your task seems like it's going slower.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, like a dial tone?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you have the phone up to your ear and then you switch ears, it seems like the dial tone is lasting longer. That's really useful in everyday life.
That's right. Wow.
Okay. So, let's see. Oh. So, here was an experiment that they did. They had people play video games.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, playing the video game, and then they delayed the movement after they pressed the button.
Mm.
And then, so eventually, the players were they adjusted to that, right?
Okay.
And then they put it back, they fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then, the players believed that the cause, so the button pressing, happened before the effect actually happened. So, playing a video game, even though they set it back correctly, they calibrated it correctly, they thought that they still had to do it earlier.
No, there was still a gap
Yeah.
in between.
Yeah. Even though, and that's called reversal of temporal order judgment.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day.
Oh, sure. Okay, emotional states.
Okay.
So, we were kind of talking about this, when you're like in awe of something, time goes by slower. Like, oh my god, that's so cool. Because you're focused on it. When you're focused on something, time goes by slower. Fear. Time slows down when you're in dangerous events, like a car accident, robbery.
Well, that's interesting because people always say, you have some traumatic accident or something like that, that time seemed to slow down.
Yeah, it goes down.
That they could actually sometimes take action in what seems like a split second, but to them it was like there was time to think and to do, as opposed to perception of time in everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, like when I got into that car accident in high school in the mountains,
Yeah.
I remember as the vehicle was rolling, and I can still remember the exact thoughts in my mind were, okay, cover your eyes, you may break some bones, but you're not going to die in this. Specific, sequential thoughts I remember. And that accident was probably a matter of seconds, and it was over. But and the other question too, like when you're in fear, is how much does the fear affect your later recall of the events? Like, was I really thinking that?
Yeah.
Or am I thinking that now, what I should have been thinking?
You supplied it to yourself.
Yeah, back then, I don't
created
know.
memory.
Yeah.
Well, there's definitely, obviously, a link between memory and the perception of time. I mean, because memory is, we did an episode on memory, but memory is not, it's not the actual event, right? It's just every time you remember something, you're remembering the last time you remembered it.
That's interesting.
So you're not, you're remembering how slow it went. You're remembering, it's not the actual event. It's the perception of the event.
That's it. Like when you're talking about various emotional states, how do they know that? Well, they ask you later.
Yeah.
True.
Boo, we scared you. How did you feel time went when we scared you?
But when you've had
And so you're not experiencing the same.
But when you've had other things that have happened to you that were traumatic, quick, like a fall or whatever, those times you're not thinking, oh, I remember that if I twist my body this way, I'm less likely to break my
Yeah.
elbow. But on that particular one that you had, which is a particularly traumatic event, I would think that there was probably some validity to people. You think that because that's a universal thing you hear people say.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like it was in slow motion. And I was having thoughts about, my family or whatever,
Yeah.
as this was happening, as I was in fear of my life. And it seems like almost a universal experience, not for every single traumatic event that has.
Let me get my coffee.
Yeah.
Well,
Product placement.
You're right. Yes, that's right.
brought to you by Starbucks. Actually not. Could you please pay me for this? Thank you.
Yeah, right. You didn't pay for it, so what are you worried about?
Sponsor.
Yes, that's right. Sponsored.
No, there's actually a thing about exactly what you said. So they had people, like, they pushed them out of a plane, did a free fall, and then they were like, please tell me, every 2 seconds how long 2 seconds is. But at the same time, they acknowledged it. They were like, okay, but you're diverting your attention. Either way, you're diverting your attention to pressing the button and not being scared. Or,
Yeah.
there's no way that you can, you can fully quantify it and fully experience the fear and the perception of time at the same time. You get what I'm saying? Like, there's no way that you can do that.
Well, they're not going to, if you're an experimental subject, they're not going to really put you at risk of your life. You're not thinking that. But when you're in an unpredictable situation, like your car rollover,
Yeah.
It's, your thoughts are going much faster than, they're probably in milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
Think of like if you fall asleep and you have a very lengthy, complicated dream with lots of things happening, and you wake up and it was 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
When in your experience in your head, it was much longer than that.
Yeah.
It's the other thing too is like when you're talking about, well, did I create that? Very definitely people create memories which seem just as real as a real memory would be. Sometimes, like if you were a little kid and somebody told you, oh, I remember that, you did this, it was, so cute,
Right.
you did this or whatever. And after a while, that becomes your own memory.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you didn't perceive it at the time, your brain is filling in the details
Mm-hmm.
to create that memory. So, memory is obviously unreliable in many ways.
Yeah.
I think the more we talk about this, the more I think, there's sort of like the factual time,
Yeah.
and then everything else is based entirely subjectively.
Yeah.
Like Dad and I were talking about my experience going to like rehab again. Like, the reason why this past 2 years have seemed so long for me was I experienced that in a different way that was unique to Dad's experience.
Yeah.
And
Well, for
So-
multiple reasons. Number one, they were chopped
Yeah.
up into different time periods, but also because they were that is fairly traumatic for you, probably very traumatic for you, but also, you're going in between sober, not sober,
Yeah.
not sober, and so that,
Well, yeah. And another part of that is like, for you, dealing with all the emotions you've had to deal with and dealing with the physical, okay? For other people, rehab would seem different because rehab would actually be a time when other people who are concerned about you could relax because you're in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going through all the turmoil internally of dealing with, part of it is, your recollections of the past. Part of it is this going to work? Part of it is, this is boring. Part of it is, I've been through this,
These people
whatever.
are stupid.
Or, what other people's perceptions are of what I'm going through and my, my health and all the rest of it. And so you pack so much more into that time
Yeah.
than other people do, who are mainly, for other people, you're going to rehab is relief. For you, it's start of a new
Right.
difficult experience. And so it seems like forever to you.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder, I mean, looks like we're running close to the end of time, but, but,
There is
how
no
does,
time limit.
how does substance affect your perception of time? And what,
I haven't.
like, for example, how, I can tell you this, other than blackouts, when I was drinking day in and day out, there was no regular sleep schedule. I couldn't tell you, I mean, apart from the behavior, but I couldn't tell you when certain major events happened. Couldn't tell you how long I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
Couldn't tell you how long,
Yeah.
what time of day it was. And so that, and then when you start going in and out of sobriety, how that affects
Yeah.
your perception of time. And then, for me, and how far out in sobriety does it start where time starts going to be easier, not faster, easier.
Yeah.
Instead of counting, I've been sober for 7 days, 8 days, and, you're just
Yeah.
trudging through it, versus,
All of a sudden it's.
I've been sober
Yeah.
for a long period of time. I don't need to count the days anymore,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But
Well, that's because I always took it, and this is from a naive perspective, that one of the reasons that people tend to drink is if they have traumatic issues in their life or troublesome issues, anxiety, whatever. And I'm not meaning you, I'm just generalizing here. That just like if a person is depressed, they sleep all the time, it's to not be conscious. Is to get past, I will not be in mental or emotional pain if I'm not conscious. And so drugs or drinking or other kinds of things are ways of erasing consciousness to avoid pain. And so for a person who, like you were saying, you had no consciousness of time really, that's part of it, And so
It's like that movie Click. Seen that movie Click?
yeah, when I was 10.
Anyway, but so
Yeah.
but that is so that affects your perception of time, because for, like you said, blackouts where you're physically, unable.
Yeah.
But I don't know if when a person blacks out, are they dreaming in a sense?
No.
Not it's just like you wake up, it's okay, that was 5 hours and I was out.
Yep.
I don't have no recollection. But then, were you experiencing something, not in the blackout, but in other times, you were experiencing something, but you weren't really remembering it because of the effects of the physical. You don't remember partly because, alcohol, when you're inebriated, it kind of eliminates some memory. You don't remember what you said last night.
Right.
But you did, at the time you did. You knew, because you were interacting in some way, not in a way that you would normally, do it without having the, effect of the substance on you. I don't know, interesting stuff. I think it's time to wrap up.
Well, let me see if I have anything interesting else. Anything else that's interesting.
With that chronoperception, huh? Kind of went far afield on this one, didn't we?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of these. Okay. One quote. We are aware of time. We are aware of the fragility of time. We are aware of what happens when your time to do the things you want is taken away from you. Our psychological state alters the perception of the passing of time, such as the perceived slowing down of time when there is little to occupy the mind.
So I would say time out.
Did you guys? What was is the thing that we do at the end? Was something that you found most interesting, or you didn't know before, or?
No, I mean, it's like, it's just one of those things.
Probably.
It's just one of those things where you don't, like any of these topics that you have, you don't really sit down and think about all the aspects of a topic.
Yeah.
And, yeah, everybody, there's an overarching theme for humans, like Dad is talking about, like, how much time you have, left to live, but the other is, even like the most mundane things. Like yesterday when I was at work, I was talking to a customer and I said, I've got 17 minutes and 32 seconds left until I clock out, and it's quitting time. And, and then there's 5 minutes left, and all of a sudden I'm like, where did the time go?
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of interesting to take a step back and look at all the various aspects of our perception of time.
Yeah.
I think it's really, interesting how it's not just one thing. It's a culmination of everything. Like, it's your, how old you are. A point I didn't touch on in here is, like, even the temperature can affect how the passage of time, and, it's...
How much you have to pee?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's just, almost everything can affect it, and everyone's perception of time, it's just your perspective, and it's really tied into your memory, and, it's hard, you can't really quantify it.
Well, I think one thing, these kinds of podcasts, when we're going to sit around and talk about things that, pass through your mind, but you don't really examine, kind of like you're saying, is how universal things are really among human beings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think, probably everybody one time or another has thought to themselves, is my blue the same as your blue?
Yeah.
Do you perceive the same thing I perceive? Same thing with time and other things like that. And then you've kind of realized that humans are built in a way that they have many of the same reactions to the same things. Even maybe it's different in your different society, but among a certain society, you tend to have the same kind of reactions. So we're at the 1 minute or 1 hour and 3 minute time frame. Shall we wrap up?
Are you trying to wrap up?
I'm saying...
Okay, I guess
Time
we're
out.
wrapping up.
Oh, shit.
Alright, I guess we're wrapping up.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and follow.
Send money.
Send money. Okay, bye.
Starbucks, are you hearing us?
Okay, bye.